All right, listen. I got done I got done listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about like very specifically something unrelated and whatever else. But the thing that he was saying was the concept of there can be something that's like okay, you his example or the thing that he was talking about was you can have, for example, a wow, that's a lot brighter. You can have an idea in your head about how things work, and you can be wrong about it, and it can be a thing um, that maybe you have to revisit and stuff. Like the way that the planets moved. Obviously, we all know that some people thought it was perfect circles. It wasn't, and some people thought it was wiggly circles. So like Mercury and retrograde and all that jazz. But and that made good predictions, which clicked in my brain. And so, but it's like that's wrong too, because that's not how they actually move. And then you change how the sun is, and then in the center of everything, which makes sense, although it's not, it's a little bit to the side. There's like this tiny little area that's slightly outside of the sun that everything pulls all things, and everything orbits that spot, which is like crazy. It's like a Lagrange point, but for the entire solar system, which is wild and awesome. Moving on. So the topic that I'm bringing up is space-time doesn't curve, and that's because all of the stuff that we notice and the observations that we have about how space-time is supposed to work around a planet and how everything pulls in and everything, all those models and the way that we can understand and make predictions on those things, it all makes sense and it all works, but it's not how it actually works, is the thing. Time is also something that doesn't dilate, it doesn't change whatsoever. Time is unaffected by gravity. I'm saying this right into your face. Time is unaffected by gravity and speed. So the thing is, right? People are under the impression that if you look at Interstellar, that's a real scientist talking about what they think a black hole will do. This is the leading science. Everything's riding on this. Everything is aware of this. Like Einstein and everyone was sure, and they made these. Here's the thing that happened, right? They made these experiments. They had an in the 70s they made three atomic clocks. One was on the ground, one went around the world in the same direction as the orbit of the rotation of the Earth, and then another plane with another atomic clock went around the world in the opposite direction against the rotation of the Earth. I've already made a video about this, but it's important to recap this because it is a key piece of evidence about it. Because the thing is, when you go with the rotation of the Earth, your speed and the Earth's speed combine. You travel a further distance per moment than if you were to go the other way. It's like that movie Benji Saves Christmas. He explained it perfectly, although that is weird that Santa Claus is the one explaining science, but it is. It happened. That if the sun facing the earth and then you stay basically where it's sunset and then you travel with the sunset, right? Keep going in that same direction that the sunset is traveling. Look it up. Look, The Veggie Saves Christmas is a very great movie. Um, Multiplicity and all that stuff. It was fun. The point is, in regards to the experiment with the atomic clocks, going in the opposite direction, like against the speed of the orbit, the rotation of the Earth, you end up moving a less distance than the other plane. And this is something that you can calculate. And so there was estimations onto how much time would be either gained or lost, depending on how time dilation as they knew it worked. And their predictions were off by a bit, which is crazy. But the thing to note is that time dilation is wrong entirely. So here's what's actually happening with the atomic clocks as far as I can understand, and I hope by the end of this you understand it too. As you're moving a certain distance, given a certain amount of speed, it's a certain distance over time. So moving with the rotation of the Earth, you're moving that extra distance. So with an atomic clock, what they do is they shine a light towards a effectively a mirror and they bounce it back. It's not a mirror, it's a beryllium atom as far as I remember. And it's very precise. It's supposed to give an exact number for every photon. And the thing is that the further distance you go, the longer it'll take for light to travel within even the tiniest confines of the atomic clock itself. So it really doesn't matter the size of the atomic clock. The point is, if the entire mechanism is going a certain speed and light has to keep up with it, then it also goes an extra distance to keep up with that faster target. Now, you would think, okay, well, that's compensated by the fact that when it bounces backward, it has the inversion of that same speed. Okay, I might give you that. The two-way speed of light contradictory situation is that when you know the two-way distance of a light source to something else, you end up with, and the speed of light and whatever else, you end up with the idea that light in one direction is always the same speed, but the truth is, light has to travel through whatever space in order to get to wherever it's getting. So, again, if you go with the rotation of the Earth, it's going a further distance over time to get to that first atomic particle, so that its reflection is delayed compared to if you go in the opposite direction and the speed of your plane and the speed of the Earth's rotation are subtracted from each other. So if the speed of the Earth was, say, 300 kilometers an hour and you're 150 kilometers an hour, then your actual total speed is 150 kilometers an hour. It's still in this direction, but you've slowed it down by half. If you go the opposite direction, you speed up to 450 kilometers an hour. That's a basic estimation of what you can expect with experiments like this. because they're going a specific speed, you take that and you either add that to the rotation of the Earth and you get your total speed and distance traveled, or you subtract it and you end up with your total speed and total distance traveled. So when you have a less distance traveled, the light has a faster return time than when you have a longer travel. And the same thing happens in satellites in space. Now, it's possible that they could have already compensated for this, but here's the thing, right? The thing that, I guess the thing that makes me the most bothered is that I remember Kyle Hill making a video about um, this type of problem, and it doesn't make sense to him why it would be any different. The only thing that actually can change is time for some reason. Literally, if a satellite goes faster, then the light has to travel a further distance over time to get to the mirror and reflect back. And satellites are constantly slowing down. So there's a constant deceleration. It could be a consistent rate, but it could also be slightly steady rate, and then eventually they make a burn so that they can get back up to speed, and for that time, it's accelerating back to a higher speed, a further distance over time. So it's not just that these dynamic systems are going both ways. They are making it so that the clocks go faster or the clocks go slower. And it doesn't matter that they're going around the planet with how they're doing it. It doesn't matter the distance from the planet and all of that. And I find it funny how the distance and speed seems to compensate for the gravitational effects, so it's almost negligible, and therefore they haven't even contemplated that it's not a thing. Gravity has nothing to do with time. Speed has nothing to do with time because of how the atomic clock works. It is an inaccurate clock when it comes to any moving object that is moving at an irregular speed. So if the speed constantly goes up and down, you have to calculate for every single step of acceleration and deceleration. It's not saying it's impossible, but it means that once you learn how to do that, you can have these systems running automatically and then use them on on a distant planet, and you'll still have good math. You'll still make good programs, and they will still do what you want them to do when they are supposed to do it correctly. Instead of having, we have a very big crutch right now. Atomic clocks on the ground are sending their signals to satellites, and they're compensating for everything using this base understanding of time instead of properly knowing how time is passing. And I find that to be incredibly bad. If you have to have something nearby, constant, that has the atomic clock, has the thing that is your base of time, and then so you have a clock that is accurate and constant and never going to be wrong, so that you never make a misfire of your engines or whatever. Like, if you don't have that system in place that compensates for everything, you're in the dark ages. And that's where we are right now. And that's what I want to avoid. But also, the idea that unfortunately this also means that because space-time doesn't curve, now why do I bring in time dilation? Time dilation is a function within space-time curvature. It states that it's another thing that proves space-time curvature. Proves. It doesn't prove because it's false. So the problem is you have this model, it explains everything well, space-time curvature, it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't actually solve what's happening. The basic thing that's happening is buoyancy, and that heavier elements want to fall into the Earth, and that drags in literally everything else that is also small, including electromagnetic fields. This is a completely random direction for everything to go. Bear with me. Everyone understands that if you move a magnet through some copper tubing and stuff, you excite the electromagnetic field in that and you make a magnetic field. You can generate power with this. Very obvious. Everything is made out of atoms. All of them have the electrons and neutrons and protons, all these positive and negative parts. All of these parts all interact with the electromagnetic field in some basic way. So when a lot of parts are, even on the smallest scale, are being sucked into the planet due to its gravity, or the fact that it's moving through space and it's all being pushed and smushed against the planet, that's how it actually is happening, by the way. But there is also a suction, but it's not a natural suction. It's it's just how buoyancy works, that the heavier stuff wants to be on the bottom and the lighter stuff wants to be on the top. So we have supplementing gases that are coming off of the planet, and we have other stuff that's pulling in. So the thing is, when you end up with, like for example, the closer you are to the gravity well, you're also failing to say that you're closer to the planet. So the further out your orbit is, the further distance you're traveling. That's just obvious. The inside of the, it's like the inside of the bullseye versus the outside of the bullseye. You're moving the entire area of the orbit of the bullseye, or a record. A record is an excellent example that on the inside it only has like 1/4 inch, but then you move out and it has 1/4 foot or 1 cubic foot or square foot. God damn it. I can say it correctly. Circular foot. Foot diameter. Whatever. The point is, records, the further out you go, if you were to actually be an ant traveling on that record, you'd go a larger distance than if you're on the inside of the record. Same thing happens if you're orbiting a planet. You go around the planet, and the closer you are to that, the more likely you are to experience stronger g-forces. Because first of all, you're still close enough to the planet that you're being pulled in. And you're going fast enough that, like, you just experience lots of g-forces. The further out you go, you can go a relatively low speed, and or it could be 11,000 meters per second or whatever, or something. It can be incredible speed, And relative to everything else, you barely feel any of it. Especially for satellites, they don't give a shit. So it's a lot easier to have an orbit further away and everything. So you have to realize orbits that are going around the planet in a close loop, they have a shorter time, and they are also constantly going at high speed in order to keep going and not fall in. And then, like geosynchronous orbits, they're just being pulled, but they're also able to not need to be pulled more in order to stay where they are. They basically just are there. There's like these positions where it's like it's not too close, it's not too far away, the pull and the push or the being flung out and the being sucked back in zone. There's like this lovely spot where it's like, oh, this is geosynchronous orbit. There you go. You have that now. That's great. Anything below that, you're going to be pulled in unless you fight it. Thing is, and there's one thing I remember another Kyle Hill video saying something about trying to notice time dilation as the signals of stuff being sent outside, like gravity waves or whatever, I think it was, being affected by time dilation so that, or it was that, or it was pulsars. I forget what it was. It doesn't matter. Signals sent to Earth, and because they go through the supposed time dilation stuff, they end up with certain um, they suspected that there would be some amount of time manipulation on them. But like the thing about it is, time does not at all change, no matter your velocity or your being near an orbit or whatever, any of that stuff. Because that's just absolutely the problem is it is absolutely not something anyone should have said was like a definite truth. But people believed it for so freaking long. I don't know how long. And eventually people will understand and they will know that there is no such thing as time dilation, which unfortunately also means that you can't warp space-time enough in order to, well, you can't warp space-time in the first place. But the idea was you could make a warp of space-time enough, with enough gravity and whatever else, that you could um, turn time in on itself and end up with a lovely little. And the best part is all you need is a passageway. That passageway is developed by a constant system, and all you have to do is go through this passageway, and depending how long you're in the passageway, you will go into the past, and then you just jump out, and then you're in the past. This is all based on true time dilation science that was and is believed by a majority of astrophysicists and scientists. It is completely false. It does not happen that way. Time dilation, the whole idea of time travel using the curvature of space-time, it will never happen because it doesn't happen. So I realize that by saying this, I take the world that was believing in time machines and I say, you're hopeless. There is no actual chance of a time machine. It is never going to happen. And here's the thing, we have to think of another way to make time travel happen. There are other theories of potential time travel methods, but unfortunately, the bending of space time is literally impossible. Also, the weird idea of warping space in order to go faster through space, yeah, that's just called. It's basically the same as if you were to have a ship go into the East Australian Current or whatever, the ELC, and you go in there and you have nothing else is affecting you except for the current. So you're just in there. You could go whatever speed you want through the current, just like it's a train, and it just goes fast, and then you pop out wherever you want to go. The thing about a Cuvier drive is it's um, it's again thinking in terms of they believe you can warp space time in some way. And unfortunately, that is not something that's capable of happening. What is capable of happening is you can warp the flow of objects around your ship by attracting them. Or, um, unfortunately, this is one of those situations where I would say sound would be a great idea if there was sound available in space. There unfortunately is not, so you can't move some neutrinos or neutrons because they are not affected by matter. So you're going to be bombarded by neutrons with your ship that wants to go through space. The only thing that you're able to do is hope that you can redirect objects around your ship. That's the only possibility. There's no way of actual, like, listen, if I were to make it in an ideal situation, if it existed, all you have to do is send a very thick laser, okay, down the length of travel, right? The laser would go at the speed of light, and it would give you this area of potential travel. And then if you had the ability to warp space around you, then you would be able to literally sort of slip into that laser and then go along its path and end up on the other side full size because you're in this like extraordinary space, whatever else. But the truth is, you're going to stay normal size. You're going to be going through space. Everything's going to be hitting you, and it's not a good time. So the best way to make a hyperspeed thing is to make a black hole or a star be the thing that's absorbing all the stuff that is in front of you. And then also you have to be able to somehow hold a star in place or a black hole. And two, you have to um, can objects, when you're going at that fast speed, go through the black hole or the star? Yeah, that's possible. The faster you go, the more possible it is. So it's still not a great solution. And that's my only optimistic solution for that. I'm sorry. That's just how it is. So, like, I hate to be a wet blanket, but I'm more realistic about things. I don't care to be. I love science fiction. When I found out that space-time does not bend, it breaks all these ideas. I literally wrote a book talking about the ultimate space-time manipulator. The general idea was that it was the size of the whole freaking uh, it was the size of the observable universe with four galaxies of red giant stars because they are the longest lasting stars, the most stable, and it doesn't matter because I can replenish them because if you have something like that, you'll probably have also the power to replenish them. So they are stable, they are easily manipulated and fixed, and you don't have to worry about them. So there was that. And the fact is, it was the size of the two-thirds of the observable universe. The idea was that it could change its structure in such a way that you could actually compress space and time and travel through into the future over certain distances, crazy ideas and notions. And it was a great idea, and it does not at all work that way. It will never happen. Not because it's a gigantic machine, but because the bending of space-time never will happen, so or never will actually be utilized because it doesn't happen. So the entirety of time travel is like, well, with that method is ruled out. Yeah. And I make these videos, and the reason why I bring it up is not because of a reaction to Neil deGrasse Tyson, but because of the idea of his example was the orbits of the planets and how they were understood or interpreted made for all sorts of things to be possible, but then it didn't quite make sense, and it wasn't fully making sense why a planet would go backwards and stuff, or why um, and then we thought of the sun being in the middle, and that made a lot more sense, but it was still like it's not circles, it's ellipsis, it's an egg shape. It's like you don't understand. The whole idea that God made planets do their thing is yeah, he could have done that, but the thing that he didn't do was make something that was supposedly perfect and whatever else. What he did if he did, what he would have, the only thing that he actually could have been responsible for was the way physics works, which is attractive bodies going towards and around certain things. And so it's literally fascinating. What if here's an interesting question, a separate entire thought process. Could Jupiter ever what would you have to do to Jupiter in order to change its orbit? You could do this in Universe Sandbox really easy. All you have to do is make it go faster in its orbit or slower. Speed it up or slow it down. But here's the thing. Here's the kicker, right? An object at that size, the true question is, could it ever stay in that new orbit? It doesn't matter what you could do to change its orbit. It matters, could it retain that any other orbit than where it's at? Now, for smaller planets, it makes sense. They could be anywhere in the orbit. But for Jupiter, I feel like there's a limit. I feel like there has to be some kind of boundary of where Jupiter can actually exist in the solar system. It can't be any closer to the sun, it can't be any farther away from the sun because of inertia. There's just an intuition there. And this has nothing to do with anything, just a side tangent amongst a lot of side tangents. So, yeah. Kyle Hill, you literally got emails of people telling you that there of all the factors that you could consider, why wouldn't you consider that the greater the speed is, the further the distance is for the light to travel inside the device? And if you lower the speed, you lower that distance. It's all relative, and it becomes something important for you to keep track of so that you know what is actually happening to that atomic clock. I think it was the fact that Kyle Hill's assumption was that the atomic clock in the satellite was moving at a constant speed. The problem is that assumption is based off false logic. It is not moving at a constant speed. It is constantly decelerating, and it has to burn in order to accelerate and keep its orbit. That's how satellites work that are not geosynchronous. So, yeah, you got your facts wrong. And it's the second time you've made that video. That's not okay. Because after, if you're going to revisit a topic, you need to be really. The problem is you're so sure of what you've already said that you just say it again. Because there may be a couple of things that you did notice. Well, it's time to make another revision. That's just the basic thing of it. And it's just how it is. Like Neil said, Um, when we are in the frontier, we don't know all of this stuff. The video I was talking about is, has Neil deGrasse Tyson ever been wrong? That's a weird title for him to have, but the whole idea is that it got me thinking. And he talks about all these other different ideas. It's like, yeah, we have a theory of something, but it's not entirely correct or it's not complete. It doesn't, there's still some parts missing, like how atomic particles were said to be less complete. We still need a factor of this other tiny particle called the Higgs boson. And this Higgs boson is like apparently very important. And unfortunately, I don't know if it is, but it doesn't matter. The point is there was a type of thing that we understood should be witnessed, and then we finally saw it. And so then we finally had the pieces of information. The problem is with time dilation and all that, it is said to be a solved problem, but it's not. Whatever. Anyway, that's about it. Um, so that's another 40-minute live stream of me talking about science. Sometimes I go for longer. Um, and I do apologize. I would love to have time be something that you can manipulate, but the thing is, I don't have any answers for you about that right now. It'd be great if I did. Um, would definitely get a proper Nobel Prize for making a time machine that actually works, or inventing one, discovering the idea of one, or at least proving the one type of time travel that is possible. It's funny because when I saw the TV show Timeless, they go back to Jules Verne's time machine and they say just have something orbit around the time machine and that creates the time vortex. And therefore, if it's fast enough, it will make a time bubble and you could travel through time with that. Don't do that. Do not do that. Like I said, the best way to go through time is in a tunnel. You don't want to be moving from where you are to backwards in time because you are already sitting there for a nanosecond. So when you go backwards in time, you're going to run into your own self. By which I mean, in even a nanosecond of time travel backwards of a stationary object, all the particles will run into their own selves. And that's what they really mean in the topic. Is that when you go backwards, you're traveling along a position that already has been occupied. That's what they really mean. They don't mean that when you go backwards in time and you ch- somehow bump into the individual who is your younger self, you're going to annihilate each other. That's not what they mean. What they mean, okay, is that if you go backwards through time and you're still in the same place, right? The thing about the space-time warp corridor is that it's a beautiful little device, and if space-time curvature does work, it's the only way to go back in time safely because as you're going forward through this time vortex, you will end up arriving somewhere in the past. So as long as you go in and then when the traveling is done, you end up going out. The thing is, you can't use the same vortex to go back home. You have to find another one. Because if you want to go, okay, going faster through time to go forward, simpler. Going backwards in time, you need to cycle it on itself. That's the only way it works. If you cycle it on itself, um, then as you travel through it, first of all, it's a normal corridor. It has geometry and everything, just an area of space. Similar to how the Doctor Who time box goes through this supposed corridor thing, and the whole universe is warped around it. That's kind of like what's happening, but not exactly. Um, and then the thing is, yeah, when you travel there, the moment any okay, listen. Also, each time vortex can only be used once. Okay, listen. The instant that you try traveling back in time, right, and use the time vortex, that object that is perpetuating the time manipulation, so you go around this thing and then you end up in the past. Every area, eventually, if anyone else tries to go into that, they will end up occupying similar space to you. So there is a finite amount of everything that can be at any point in time even though time is going backwards, because literally, if you travel, for example, let's say I travel through the year 2024. If someone wants to travel from 2025 to 2020, they're going to pass through the area I've already traveled through, and they might bump into me, or they might have to navigate around me in order to go through. And eventually, that time portal is going to become clogged and unusable. There is no way around this. The other thing is that the density of these machines um, may change things about the vortex itself, which is crazy. But again, unfortunately, this type of entire thing about space-time curvature, not possible, won't be used ever, doesn't work, it can't happen, you can't manipulate space-time, you can't go backwards in time, you can't go forwards in time any faster. None of that happens. You can't even send a signal backwards in time. You can't send a signal forwards. Well, you can send a signal forwards in time. It's just a time capsule at that point. That doesn't count. Sending a signal backwards in time, even if it's sent backwards 1 nanosecond, repeat that function trillions of times, and you go back nanomicroseconds. Um, you go back a long way. And the point is, that if you repeat that function, let's say you're able to go back 15 seconds, and then when you arrive there, you're able to instantaneously achieve a second jump, so you go back another 15 seconds. Each of these subsequent jumps would eventually get you backwards so far back that you're able to then exist as far back in the past as that technology exists. That was another idea, and it's based off of. It was another idea. It was based off of um, a time manipulated quantum entangled particle system. That you have two quantum entangled particles, and you would connect yourself to the one that is here, but the one that's back there is stuck in a time manipulated. It is only exists in that moment in the past because it never progresses into the future because it's in that vortex. So when you snap the other particle, you and everything you're connected to are going to go backwards, but unfortunately also time. That's a great idea. Again, doesn't happen, would never work, will never work, will never happen because the curvature of space-time doesn't exist. A time vortex will never exist. And the other thing about that is that atom- um, you cannot entangle particles. That was a completely like it went right over people's heads because what they were able to prove is that particle A, you shoot a photon towards a calcium ion or atomic thing. It splits the photon directly in half. so that one end is going this way and the other end is going the other way. And what they proved was these photons had identical, if not exact opposite, that if one was spin up, the other one would be spin down. Which of course makes sense. If you divide a baseball in half, you get one that looks like it's spin up equivalent type of configuration, and the other half is the other half of the baseball. That's just how it works. That only means that you manufactured a baseball to be cut in half, and you end up with these two parts that are, of course, it makes sense that they are one is spin up and the other one spin down. That's not even a question. That's just basic geometry. But then they say that means quantum entanglement. These particles never affected each other. We were never able to. Okay, we now have the ability to freeze a photon inside of a Bose-Einstein condensate. That still only means that it doesn't move forward in a direction. So, can we do anything with that to activate the other thing to do something that we notice in the other experiment or the other half of the experiment? And the answer is that experiment has never taken place. Okay, the Nobel Prize was given to people because they're dumb. They were too hype about it. And the evidence was like, yeah, you know what? That is a high majority of they are correlated. Yeah, they are. You split the baseball in half. You proved it. That's topology. I don't know what I said before. But it's just geometry, topology, same difference. So, anyway, I'm busting everyone's nuts today. But that's the thing. It's like, no, you didn't get time dilation correct. You didn't get the curvature of space-time correct. You still don't know what electrons do, and you are. Oh yeah, I have to make a reaction to freaking Rama. Some guy who talked about electrons, and he said he was going to explain it, and I am seriously going to be disappointed in that video. I said I put it off. I put it off, and I should make that reaction video instead of doing this. Okay, toodles. But seriously though, I'm sorry. It's just how it is. Fix your atomic clocks.